Can there really be such a thing as a bad Stark ruler? Yeah, one is called Brandon the Bad. But one of author George R. R. Martin's classic moves is to drop some cool sounding nicknames for past Stark kings, but not bother going into detail about their lore. So we know nothing other than this info dump in a brand POV chapter in the second book. Their footsteps echoed through the cavernous crypts. The shadows behind them swallowed his father, as the shadows ahead retreated to unveil other statues. No mere lords, but the old kings in the north. On their brows, they wore stone crowns. Torn Stark, the king who knelt. Edwin, the Spring King. Theon Stark, the Hungry Wolf. Brandon the Burner and Brandon the Shipwright. Jorah and Janos. Brandon the Bad, Walton the Moon King. Edarian, the Bridegroom. Iron, Benjen the Sweet and Benjen the Bitter. King Edric Snowbeard. Their faces were stern and strong, and some of them had done terrible things, but they were Starks every one, and Bran knew their tales. He had never feared the crypts, they were part of his home and who he was, and he had always known that one day he would die here too. King Brandon the Bad just sounds horrible, doesn't he? But since there's nothing to go on, I should probably talk about some of the others. This list won't be anything like the Targaryens, who Martin goes into crazy detail about. The Starks prefer to stay off the headlines, but some have had their moments. A branch family called the GREYSTARKs once rebelled with House Bolton against their Stark King of the North. The Boltons have always been rivals to House Stark, but their own family members stabbing them in the back was a huge deal. The rebels lost, however, and the GREYSTARKs went extinct in the fighting, but no GREYSTARK lord is named. Plus they aren't really Stark, so can't really go and call them the worst Stark, now can I? An important character in the story who will be relevant in the second season of House of the Dragon is Kraken Stark. He became Lord of Winterfell at age 13, so his uncle had to rule as a regent until he would become of age. Well, Uncle Bernard Stark held on to that seat for a little too long. 2 years too long. So 18-year-old Kraken took it upon himself to capture and imprison Uncle Bernard and even 3 of his sons for their coup attempt. Still not the worst Stark in my eyes, however. That goes to one of the King Brandons, that Bran named in that same chapter quote I read. There's a lot of Brandon Starks, so let me be more specific. King Brandon the Shipwright. He only gets his backstory expanded upon in the third book with this quote. It was Brandon's turn to tell a story, so he told him about another Brandon Stark, the one called Brandon the Shipwright, who had sailed off beyond the Sunset Sea. Dusk was setting by the time Duck and Tail were done, and the rain still fell. Again, short and sweet, like all the past Stark's lore, but lucky for us, some supplementary world-building books have come out since then to fill in some blanks that there wasn't space for previously. It's so funny that Martin dedicated paragraphs to describing empty towers and abandoned inns in the same chapter, but just skipped something as interesting as a Stark sailing west of Westeros.
Essos is east, and Westeros is west. But what's west of Westeros?
I don't know.
Nobody does. That's where all the maps stop.
In the book Fire and Blood, a character attempts a voyage to finally discover what's west of Westeros, after Brandon's failed attempt didn't make a dent in the cartography papers. She was not the first to dream this dream. Thousands of years before the conquest, when the kings of winter still reigned in the north, Brandon the Shipwright had built an entire fleet of ships to cross the Sunset Sea. He took them west himself, never to return. His son and heir, another Brandon, burned the yards where they were built and was known as Brandon the Burner forevermore. This doesn't sound all that bad, since a successful expedition could tenfold the family's wealth, if not more. But this had no chance of succeeding from the get. The Starks have no experience in sailing. Look where the location is on the map. Their thing is snow and ice, not water. To build a fleet for this voyage would need an insane amount of gold and resources to be poured into. Resources that could have been used for preparing for an inevitable upcoming winter that devastates this kingdom every time the season comes around. It gets so bad in the north that elder men tell their families that they're going out into the mountains in order to hunt, which really means sacrifice themselves for the family's survival, since food becomes so scarce during these times. Many freeze or starve to death. You can argue if Brandon the Shipwright did find some kind of paradise-like gold mine out west, this could permanently solve the issue of brutal winters, if those mystery lands were colonized. If the best sailors in the world avoided going out west, how could a novice make it out alive? Turns out there wasn't that much out there, besides some still waters, storms, and shitty islands, just to make it back around the world, because this is a globe after all. A king leaving with all that manpower will bring the wrong kind of attention for Winterfell and all the surrounding houses. The wrong attention being Ironborn raids, which do plague the Northerners. King Brandon the Shipwright was overly ambitious and it cost the crew for all the ships their lives. The underlying theme behind this bit of lore is a Stark must always be in Winterfell. Things go horribly wrong for the family when the ruler leaves the kingdom's borders, whether it be Ned and Robb heading south, or minor Starks going north beyond the wall. In one case, the head of the family went out to deal with some oath-breaking Brothers of Night's Watch, only to be attacked by giants and ripped apart. Brandon's fate was likely less gruesome. While there are rumors of monstrous krakens, sea dragons, and leviathans the size of islands, the manner of his death, along with the men who tagged along with him, wasn't probably all that fantastical. Thousands of years after Brandon's time, an old friend to the Targaryen family stole some dragon eggs to pay for her expedition out west. Unlike Brandon, Alyssa Farman's adventure is somewhat detailed. The man who deserted her crazy dream said, "For almost a fortnight there was not so much as a breeze, and the ships moved only as so far as we could tow them. It was discovered that a dozen casks of meat were crawling with maggots, a small enough thing by itself, but an ill omen. The wind finally returned one day near sunset, when the sky turned red as blood, but the look of it set men to muttering. I told them it boded well for us, but I lied. Before morning the stars were gone, and the wind began to howl, and then the ocean rose. That was the first storm. Another followed 2 days later, and then a third, each worse than the one before. The waves rose higher than our masts, and there was thunder all around, and lightning such as I had never seen before, great crackling bolts that burned the eyes. Brandon the Shipwright likely got hit with a similar storm, or was left stranded without proper food and water when the wind stopped. Alyssa Farman, being an actual skilled sailor, did find what was west of Westeros. Islands that existed on no known chart. Since there were 3 of them, she named them Aegon, Rhaenys, and Visenya. The islands were uninhabited, but springs and streams were plentiful, so the voyagers were able to fill their casks with all the fresh water they required. There were wild pigs as well, and huge sluggish grey lizards as big as deer, and trees heavy with nuts and fruit. Half her crew abandoned her after this point because Alyssa hoped for more out there. The ones that made it back to Westeros didn't want to face that same deadly storm. It seems like these are the worst sailing conditions in this world. Alyssa made it around the other side of the globe, finally docking in Ashai, the most eastern part of the map, where she would never be seen again. King Brandon's ships were never salvaged. It was left to his son and heir, Brandon the Burner, which does sound like a more heinous epithet than the Shipwright, to make things right by ending this unrealistic fantasy of a Stark ruler discovering what's west of Westeros. Leave that up to the Valerians and Ironborn, or even younger siblings with no real family responsibilities. This guy, subjectively being the worst Stark king, says a lot about the family.
How well do you know the North, Sir Davos?
Precious little, my lady.
My father always said Northerners are different.
Until we find out what made Brandon the Bad so bad, this family's vague history is squeaky clean.